Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, and it is now a course at NYU and an elective towards the journalism certificate. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, and follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Hi, everybody. It's Estelle Erasmus, and I'm your host for Freelance Writing Direct. And I am so happy to have Aliza Licht with us today. And I want to tell you a little bit about her. She's an award-winning marketer, best-selling author, podcaster, personal branding expert, and career development coach. With over 25 years in the fashion and media industry, she has extensive experience in branding and online storytelling. As the founder of Leave Your Mark, a multimedia brand and consultancy, she advises businesses and individuals on brand strategy. A social media pioneer and one of the first fashion influencers, Licht was the anonymous force behind the DKNY PR girl phenomena. Her first book, Leave Your Mark, Land Your Dream Job, Kill It in Your Career, Rock Social Media, offers career mentorship and advice for early professionals. Her podcast of the same name has over 1.4 million downloads and is produced by Money News Network. Her second book, On Brand, Shape Your Narrative, Share Your Vision, Shift Your Perception, 2023, is a comprehensive guide to personal branding and won the best book of 2023 in business, marketing, and advertising by the American Book Fest. Regularly featured in the media, Licht has appeared on Good Morning America, The Today Show, Bloomberg, and more. Welcome, Aliza. She's going to talk to us about branding. I think in today's day and age and in today's noise, you have to break through the noise. And one way you can do it is by having your personal brand, to the point of my personal brand includes the color pink. It's the word noticed in my book. And when I was starting my book, when I was working with New World Library, they actually said, so our team, our design team, noticed that you wear a lot of pink in your social media. Would you want to incorporate it into the book? And I said, oh my God, you see me. Yes. So let's talk about the genesis, because when Twitter was anonymous, and I remember that because I had like an anonymous handle on Twitter, you were the DKNY PR girl, and you built a following that way. Can you talk about that and how you kind of started with the whole branding concept?
Of course. And thank you so much for having me on. And yes, I love that you tied your pink together in both your look and your cover. And, you know, our mutual friend Liz Elting, also pink is her favorite color. So you have that in common. So my background is, you know, fashion industry, started on the magazine side of the business, really understanding how influence is created. Because back in the late 90s, we all heard about what we're supposed to wear the next season and what we're supposed to do from fashion magazines. And from there, I went on to corporate PR at Donna Karan. And I ended up spending 17 years at Donna Karan, ultimately ending as the SVP of Global Communications. But in 2009, we were sitting around, you know, a conference table, marketing and communications, talking about social media. And at the time, if you think back, fashion brands really only had Facebook pages. But we had heard about this newish platform called Twitter, and maybe we should get on it. And my concern as a publicist was that Donna Karan was both a person and a brand. So in thinking in terms of what is the actual Twitter handle, I was concerned that if it was at Donna Karan, people would assume she was speaking. And then who's writing that copy and who's responding and is she approving it? And it just seemed like opening a whole can of worms. So it was at the time when Gossip Girl was really popular. And I said, well, what if we had an anonymous character? What if it was not Donna Karan or anyone real? We could think of it in terms of, PR. Maybe she's like, I don't know, DKNY PR girl. And she can be represented by a fashion illustration. So this idea sort of was tossed around, and we ended up pitching it to management and legal, of course. And our general counsel in Newsstand was like, okay, this sounds fine, but Aliza, you're the only person who's allowed to tweet. And I was like, okay. I didn't even know what that meant. I had never been on Twitter. I was like, but she wanted someone who was a seasoned publicist to make sure that, nothing would go wrong. So initiation by fire started on Twitter. And it's interesting because your question was, how did I get into quote unquote branding? So everything in communications, certainly in fashion luxury, is about optics and positioning, right? And when we think about branding, we think about first and foremost like a belief system of why this brand exists. And from a founder perspective, if you're lucky enough to work with a founder, understanding the motivation behind why they created in the first place, okay? But when we're thinking about social media or what I was able to do back then, it wasn't so much about branding as it was about storytelling. So I created a filter and brand guardrails, which is what I do recommend for people to do in my book on brand. Created these brand guardrails to think in terms of what this character should be talking about. And in thinking her through, and I really did think of it as like almost like paper dolls. Like I really thought of it as paper dolls. I wanted her to be your best girlfriend. I wanted her to be witty, maybe a little sarcastic. I wanted her to feel aspirational, but also accessible. So I approached it from the perspective of like, if people were to be friends with this person, what would she tell you? She'd probably tell you that the dress is not going to work on you because you're too short. So I was very direct. So in doing that, I essentially created a micro brand within a brand.
I love that. I love that. So when you say that you recommend doing guardrails, like what do you mean about that? Because I tweet, I'm on, or X or whatever it's called now, I'm on TikTok and I share clips from my podcast. And I sometimes will, say something, tape myself saying something that I'm teaching or doing, or share some tips. But what I'm not doing is saying, hey, I went with my family on family vacation and we hung out by the lake and my daughter goes to camp. I don't do that on social media, except for my locked down Facebook page.
Right.
That's the only place I do it, not my professional Facebook page, but everywhere else, it's purely connected to either my book, Writing That Gets Noticed, or the work that I teach at NYU, or the writing tips that I'm sharing. Do I need to, is that what you mean by guardrail, the protective element?
So essentially you have established a brand guardrail, which means you're not going to talk about that content category, of which a lot of people do infuse into their social media. So essentially what it means, and this is so when I started on brand, I thought to myself, okay, I think I need to be the first case study, because I had this very long corporate career. I created what is considered now historically the first example of a fashion influencer. It actually has been documented in Taylor Lorenz's extremely online history of social media book and many others. Obviously, I didn't seek to do that, but that's what ended up happening. And I think in terms of presenting my own situation of becoming this, I didn't mention before, but it was anonymous. So for almost 2 years, nobody knew it was me until I was revealed as that person. One of the principles, and I will answer your question, that I think is really important that I came up with in my first book, Leave Your Mark, but also reiterated it in On Brand, is something that I suffered from, which is something that I coined last name syndrome, which is very common when you work for a very credible company and you remove your last name. So I would introduce myself as, I'm Aliza from DKNY. And then in my mind, I worked with Virginia from Vogue, and everyone was first name from company. Okay. So when we think about that, we essentially are riding on the credibility of a company, which there's nothing wrong with it. But by doing that, you're not building equity in your own name, because the reality is what you do today may not be what you do tomorrow, right?
Yes.
So when I first started thinking about On Brand, I was like, let me reverse engineer what I was actually able to do once I left the company, and all of a sudden realized, like, well, who am I now without the title, without being part of this brand, without being that character anymore? It was very humbling and very scary to feel almost naked in yourself. So then I started to think about, okay, well, where do I have permission to play? So the first exercise in understanding sort of your worldview is really the Venn diagram, in thinking about the buckets of where you play. I play in fashion, I play in career advice. I'm a mentor, I have a book, I do coaching, I do consulting in brand. So all the things that encompass me. It's very easy to see the center where those things converge and like what the commonalities are. Fashion, social media, communication, supporting women, things like that. But at the same time, it doesn't tell you where you should stop. So when I think about brand guardrails, I think about it in terms of, where do you have permission to play? So for example, if you take someone who online, let's say a celebrity who does like little cooking things in their kitchen on Instagram, right? And their community starts to understand, like, they like to cook, or they're good at cooking, or they cook often and they share recipes. That person has permission to write a cookbook because they have established that that is part of their brand. Now, could that same person do something in like the medical industry? No. So it's like, where do you have permission to play? Based on your belief system, your core values about like who you are and what you want to be known for.
Yeah.
What are things that you should not speak to? So in On Brand, I have a whole chapter on crisis communications, especially for executives, and understanding that what's very important is for especially leaders to understand what are some areas of communication that they should not speak to. And the list of the no's is really what you have to stick to as a filter before you actually post something online.
That makes so much sense. And it's so interesting because I just finished telling you that I don't post about my daughter or my husband on social media. However, I write about them. I was a parenting writer, and I recently wrote something for Shondaland about being hearing impaired and parenting my daughter and kind of how she took advantage. So anything that I put out in the publishing sector like that, I'll share. So
Right.
that's how people get to know me, but I won't post about it like, oh, had problems with my hearing aid today. I won't do that.
Right. But I think that that's yet another guardrail, right? It's like you've said to yourself, okay, this medium is not okay for this content. This medium feels more comfortable or is more on brand for you, in the same way that I'll post on Instagram things that I would not post on LinkedIn, right? It's not to say that you can't find them. The internet is one big happy place, right? But it's still thinking about the content, the format, and the medium, which is really important to do.
This is so important. And this discussion is so important because I feel back when you were on Twitter, it was really the place to be. It was the party. It was the 24/7 party. Like, I couldn't get enough of it. First, I was anonymous too. I had like and then I said, oh, it looks like people are revealing who they are. And so I revealed who I was, because you don't know in the beginning. But now the algorithm, Aliza, is so odd for social media. Like, I feel like it's a snippet here, a snippet there. You could be on Facebook, you could be on Instagram, you could be on TikTok, and it's just like little bits, and they're constantly changing the algorithm. And it doesn't feel that unifying like it used to feel back in the day. Can you speak to that and how it affects branding today?
So you're right. I mean, we're still calling it Twitter because obviously we didn't shake that name, but X today is not the same. Back then, well, one, it was new to many people. Two, it was fresh, it was a fresh playground. I always, and I wrote this in Leave Your Mark, I think, I thought of it as the biggest cocktail party in the world.
I remember you saying that. Yeah.
Because you can jump into any single conversation and no one's going to look at you like, why are you here? In a way, it's better than a real cocktail party because it's very hard and sometimes awkward to like walk to a group of people at a cocktail party and sort of insert yourself. But that was very welcomed and normal on Twitter. I think that when social media was new and more pure, and organic reach was possible in a more consistent way, it really encouraged more people to be a part of it. Today, as you said, the algorithm is so demoralizing because good content sometimes doesn't reach its intended audience because maybe the format doesn't make sense for the medium, or maybe your version of how you message that doesn't work in the medium that it's in. And it's really a thankless job in a lot of ways. My mentality in general with the algorithm is really testing and learning constantly. And sometimes you post something and like I pay very close attention to my analytics. So when I post something or when I create content, I think in terms of, okay, this piece of content is more than 90 seconds long. I know intuitively how many views it should accumulate within a certain time frame. And if it doesn't accumulate that, I know that the format and the medium was not right for that piece of content, not necessarily that there's something wrong with the message, because I'm very clear about how I message and I'm very clear about why I'm doing it. And one of the tips that I could say to your listeners is anytime you post anything, you have to ask yourself, number one, is this in service of your North Star goal of what you want to be known for? Number two, who are the stakeholders out there who control your progress? It could be clients, it can be your boss, it can be investors, and how will they perceive what that content is? And three is, why am I posting this? And is it within my brand guardrails? And the guardrails, once you do it a bunch of times, you really will start automatically thinking in terms of, does this fit within my brand? But the why am I posting it part is something where if you don't know the type of reaction you're looking for before you hit post, that's a mistake.
Right. So to your point, I've seen these long rambling vents from influencers, and I'm like, well, what are they trying to achieve here? I don't understand. It's just like a rant for whatever is bugging them at the moment. And I feel that it kind of cuts away at their credibility because they have to have a little bit of a separate view that it's not just about them. It might just be about them because it is their brand, but are they just taking license now in a way that a kid will do a tantrum in a grocery store? And this is they're being a tantrumer.
So it's clickbait, right? So it's no different than when, the New York Post or the Daily Mail or really any site at this point, because I think it's become so prevalent, changes headlines. They change headlines throughout the day because they're looking at traffic. They're looking at clicks. So I do think, and I wrote this in On Brand, 0 F's given branding is a chapter in On Brand because it is proven that the more controversial you are, the bigger your audience will grow. And that is an unfortunate thing because people sometimes use that as a tactic for the sole purpose of follower count versus the merit of the content or the educational background of the content. Like, are you coming from a place of knowledge when you are ranting about this topic? And most of the time, people are not.
I agree completely. So I have a lot of students and listeners and viewers who are maybe they say, I want to write a book or I'm writing a book. And when I talk to agents, when I talk to publishers, they say, I don't have a big enough platform. And then they say, what should I do, Estelle, to build that platform? And I say, well, one of the things you can do is write stories, write micro memoir, write something that's going to get published with a very highly credible publication. And you can use that to linchpin on your other media that you're going to do. Start talking about your book, start talking about some of the elements of it, and then build on that so that people are kind of following you to find the next thing without giving away your whole book. But they are stymied as to how, like, what's the very generic, basic beginning steps for building a quote unquote platform, which is really just kind of people know who you are. People want to find you somewhere.
So this is literally why I wrote On Brand, because it is unfortunate that you could have an amazing book proposal or have written a manuscript and that's not good enough. And the reason that's not good enough is because publishers depend on authors to be marketers. And actually, a big chunk of my consulting now with individuals is with authors building their personal brands and launching their books, because why should authors be marketers? Like, you're an author, like, you did the hard work over there. Why do you now need to have 30 years of marketing and communications experience, right? It's not fair, but it is a reality. So I do provide that service. Here's what I can say. People cannot wait to be handed the opportunity. So I think you're very right in saying, start writing, start posting, start creating the world that you want to live in through your own content that you can control. And the reality is that when we think of ourselves, or we think about strong personal brand, I always say that, to me, the definition of a strong personal brand is when you've done the work to shape your narrative and communicate it to your network so that they can actually speak about you when you're not in the room and recommend you for opportunities that other people haven't heard of and you are not present for, because you have armed them with that information. And that can be done in a couple different ways. That can be that you really think through, and in On Brand, I have these mental gymnastics exercises, as you know, where it's a workbook. Doing your Venn diagram, putting together your brand guardrails, putting together a content strategy, thinking in terms of what you want to put out there and what you want to be known for, and rinse, repeat, because repetition is reputation. If you want people to think of you a certain way, they need to hear you message that thing over and over again in new and interesting ways. And the only way you can do that is by creating content yourself.
I love that. And that's one of the reasons that I started the podcast before I launched my book. Before it was published, I thought, well, this is a great way to kind of bring it out. And my guest the week that I launched my book was Cheryl Strayed. And so that really helped. And I had a number of other things going on. I spoke at ASJA and a couple of people shouted out my book that day.
I love that.
It all kind of worked really well together. So you have pro tips throughout the book, which I love, because throughout my book, I have Estelle's Edge, which is my pro tips. So, And one of them on page, let's see, it's page 81. Your email signature can be used as lead generation for anything you are trying to drive traffic to. And I have really taken that to heart. I think I read it in your book, but I also had been doing it in a truncated way because sometimes as a journalist, when you're sending to publications like Condé Nast, they have like they're careful if there are too many email signatures, they'll think that it's spam. So what I tell my students is just do your top ones, put that
Mhm.
in your, if you're sending to a particular publication, but otherwise, for your general, yes, have that. And I think another good thing is when I go on vacation, I make it work for me. My out of office message mentions my book, mentions that it's coming out in an audiobook, mentions anything that I want. So, and I think you would agree that that's one of these branding or just making it work for you situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's taking advantage of free real estate. A lot of, I mean, I wrote in on brand, as you know, like how many people have sent for my iPhone? Unless you work in Apple, at Apple in marketing, why are you marketing Apple? Why not market something that you're doing?
Right. And you have so many great tips all throughout this book. Like
Thank
you
you.
said, a common example is when people post on social media that they were honored to speak on a panel. They're sharing this because they want their network to know that they were asked, and they're also planting a seed in other people's minds to think of them for future panels. And then you're saying even a better way, which I love this, Aliza. You're saying, look, not just mention your own, but say, I was honored to speak on this panel with amazing women, X, Y, and Z. And I love that because it's elevating the message and it's bringing other people into it, and they're more likely to share it. And I have to admit, sometimes I do it and sometimes I'm rushed and I don't do it, but I think it's great to do it.
I
And
can't,
also, you add more
yeah.
even. Talk about what else to add to that to make it a real win.
Yeah. So really and I can't remember if I wrote this in the book, but I have said it on social. It's not just giving credit to the people around you who join you on the panel, but also can you share some of the takeaways for people that didn't get to attend this talk and can learn something from it? So thinking about your social media in terms of service oriented content is very important. The other thing that I think is really important, I mean, obviously, I'm a big proponent of sharing your wins and making sure people understand where you are in your journey. But at the same time, I'm not a proponent of bragging. So I have a rule, as you know, which is for every one time you are sharing a win or promoting yourself, proactively go out and amplify 5 other people in your network who are also trying to share something that will benefit them, because it's good karma and it also makes the ratio a little bit more palatable, because unfortunately we all know people that just sit there talk about themselves all day, and those are not very fun people to follow.
I know. And there are also people who complain all day long. I'm
Yeah.
writing, occasionally I'll do one of those posts, like I'm struggling, but people will do it like every day. Oh, this is my latest dilemma. And it just, to me, it becomes tedious. It's like, okay, buck up, sissy pants, as my husband would say,
Yeah.
like a stoic South African.
So, I mean, the thing is, there is something to be said for, being authentic, right? But I believe that there is TMI, and I think that what vulnerability you share, if you choose to do it, should really never relate back to a core competency. Like if you're an accountant and you say that you hate Excel and you're not really good at it on social media, I would say that's not very positive for your career, right? So it's like there's being honest and then there's being smart. And I
Yep,
think the other thing, unfortunately, that people confuse is when you are vulnerable on social media, and you see it a lot on LinkedIn, people are sharing everything
I
and it
know.
gets a lot of engagement. And the thing is that you cannot confuse likes and comments for success, because you may have written a piece of content that people very much relate to, but it may not be benefiting your ultimate goal in what you want to do. So thinking in terms of, again, why am I posting this? What do I hope to get from posting this? And making sure that it's a piece of content that your stakeholders will appreciate before you do it.
Interesting. Now, what about the vague posts? You know, I have news, it's coming Friday. I've done a couple, but not many of them. I don't do it that often, but
That's just a fun teaser. That's fine. I mean, I think it's completely fine. I think that's really trying to stir conversation and pique interest and signal to people that there's something happening.
Yeah.
Totally fine. Totally fine.
So you say something in your book, it's a pro tip. It says turn off the setting that notifies your network when you change your profile before you make the edits. You will want to do this incognito. Talk to me about it because I've changed my picture and then all of a sudden people are like, oh, beautiful new picture. And I'm like, wait, you could see it, you know? So is that what you mean or is there something?
Yes. That comment, sure. On Facebook, I know that happens as well. It's really a LinkedIn tip in terms of sometimes you go into your profile and you're making edits to your experience or you're making edits to your skill set. And I think that communication should be thoughtful and intentional versus something that's not in your control. So if you are spending time perfecting your LinkedIn page, you might want those changes to just be represented versus announcing to people that you're making changes. So I think it's very important to know that that setting exists because when you, let's say you are making changes to your experience, maybe you don't, maybe you just got laid off or maybe something happened and now all of a sudden you're notifying your whole network that you updated your LinkedIn page. It's just, you have to be intentional and smart. You can't, and unfortunately, that tactic generates engagement. Again, maybe not the right type of engagement in the moment that you are dealing with professionally or personally.
We've covered so much here. I want to just put a little shout out to something that you do in your branding that I love. When you do posts, I think it's on Instagram Reels, or it might be TikTok, you're putting lipstick on and get no, I'm completely like I'm obsessed with this. You're putting lipstick on and or makeup, you're doing your makeup and giving advice on branding. And I thought, how brilliant that, like, I don't think it would work with me, but like you tie in your fashion experience, beauty experience. Oh, I was once a beauty editor decades ago, so maybe it could work. I don't know if I was focusing on that aspect of
Yeah.
writing, but I just love that. So tell me how you came up with that and maybe like an equivalent that somebody else could do based on what their background is.
So there's a couple answers to this question. Thank you for asking it. First and foremost, when Instagram first introduced Reels and made it very clear that video was the future of the platform, I was very resistant. I was like, you know what? I am not going to be somebody who's like setting up a photo shoot, changing my outfits, producing all these videos to bank the content, to roll it out later. My social is always in real time. Even when I was DK my PR girl, no content calendar, no schedule, gut intuitive. If I had something to say, I would say it. So the idea of like producing for Instagram Reels, I rejected. Now, that didn't last long because I realized if you're swimming against the current of what the platform wants you to do, it's going to be very challenging to get the same level of impressions and engagement that you used to with static images. But at the same time, I hated speaking to camera. And even though I was super comfortable speaking to someone like a producer on television, I hated that straight on, just like I am now like a broadcast person speaking on camera. And I found it to be very uncomfortable. So I realized that if I was doing something else while I was speaking, my brain was paying attention to the activity versus the words because I can speak on all my topics. I know they're intuitive. I have almost 30 years of experience. I don't need to like have a script. I have a lot to say off the cuff. But when I started to realize that like doing something made me more comfortable, I started to realize that that was a way to get comfortable speaking to camera. Now, I wear red lipstick, just like you wear pink. My signature is red lipstick, red nails.
Yeah.
There are red lips on the cover of Leave Your Mark, and there's red lips on the cover of the paperback version of On Brand. I am a makeup girl. I used to do makeup for weddings. I also feel very strongly that social media should fit into your schedule, that you shouldn't have to be a slave to this production day where you have to have 20 outfit changes to produce, 20 videos. So I said to myself, okay, when do I have time? I don't want to set up anything. I just want to have it easy. I want there to be a ring light on a table. When am I most fresh? And when do I have the most time to even do this? And I realized, well, why don't we kill two birds with one stone? So on my makeup table, when I'm getting ready in the morning, which is when my brain is just like fresh and I'm thinking of all the things, I have my ring light. And then I'm really at this point being efficient. Like I literally am getting ready because I need to leave. But at the same time, I know that if I don't create content right then and there, it won't happen until the next day because I don't have time. So it's efficiency, but the backstory was really getting comfortable doing it.
That is such a great story. So what if somebody's in another field, like let's say somebody has, I don't know, their expertise is in knitting. Would you recommend that they knit while they're giving their tips? Or
Yes,
they're a
yes.
plumber, would you recommend that?
Maybe not plumbing, but I will say that, certain activities like putting on your makeup, knitting, they're also satisfying to watch. So you have to remember that people are usually watching Instagram reels with the sound off. Okay, so that's why closed captions are so important. That's why your sort of hook is so important. But if you are visually doing something, as people are going through their timeline, they're going to stop to watch you. And then bonuses, you're speaking. So it is really a strategy of getting your content to be stickier than just straight up talking.
I love that you say that, Aliza, because literally I'm watching late at night. My husband's sleeping already, and I can't put the sound on. I'm just looking at the captions. So brava on that. There's so much more I could talk to you about, but I do want to do a shout out for something that you've been doing that is so helpful. You do numerous posts against the anti-Semitism that has been roiling the world, particularly since October 7th. And as the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, I want to thank you for that. And I think it's so important to have voices like yours amplifying the important messages that we need to have out there for everyone to see.
Well, thank you so much for acknowledging that. It means a lot. I am the granddaughter of 4 Holocaust survivors. And actually, on LinkedIn, I wrote a piece called Why Being a Jewish Activist Wasn't on Brand for Me. It was not within my guardrails. And I wrote an entire piece on why it became part of my content strategy, because that is representative of my values and my belief system. So it is something that obviously I started on October 7th, although I had spoken out about anti-Semitism prior when the whole Kanye West thing happened. But October 7th, I realized that because I am really nimble at content creation and I am someone who feels very knowledgeable about these issues, I can create content for the purpose of not just education, but giving people in my community something they can share. For everyone who can't speak out or doesn't create content, because obviously most people don't, giving them the tools to have their voice out there without actually having to do the work. So it's become an and, not an or. Sometimes I think it does take over everything. I am trying to be more balanced between sort of my normal personal branding, marketing, communications, career advice side of myself. But at the same time, I think that's why in On Brand, there's this whole exercise on working through your belief system and your values, because, personal branding is is unique to every person. And the reason why the book is called On Brand is because when something's on brand for you, it's not just what you say or what you do, it's also what you choose to align with. It's your mannerisms, your energy, your attitude. It's all those things rolled together. So in thinking in terms of brand guardrails, like what is on brand for me wasn't necessarily posting about anti-Semitism on social media. However, it is on brand from a belief system. So, and by the way, you can evolve. You can add things into your brand as you go and as the world necessitates or your job necessitates. But thank you for acknowledging that. It's become very important work for me. And, I do think that now is the time to do it. And I also think like people were like, oh, aren't you scared you're going to lose clients and followers and all the things? And my answer to that is my grandparents did not survive the Holocaust for me to be scared of Instagram followers and clients.
I love that. You're such a gift, and if not now, when? Exactly.
Yes.
Aliza, what's next for you?
Oh gosh, Estelle, I am going to be working on a novel.
I love it.
I dabbled in fiction in my first book, Leave Your Mark. So Leave Your Mark came out in 2015. Yes. And I like to think of it as The Devil Wears Prada meets career advice, because it's my sort of memoir, like break into fashion and all the fun fashion stories change to protect the not so innocent. But I feel that I have much more to talk about in terms of fiction or based on a true story. And so that is a project that I am embarking on now, and we'll see if I end up doing it. I don't know, but I want to.
I love it. I love it so much. Thank you so much for being a guest. It's been such a pleasure. I'm going to share that LinkedIn article you mentioned, including all the places where people can find you and buy your book in my show notes. Thank you.
Oh my God. Well, thank you for being a great host. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I loved all the questions you asked me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.